after hearing about basically incidents, we're now in the incident response phase, so just go for it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and thanks all of you who are like so late. I know this is the last talk. We all want to go to the dinner and to finish up the day, so let's wrap up with something very quickly. This is another small talk. This is going to be 30 minutes. Let me move company and ourselves. You can check on the presentation later. This a quick presentation. Some disclaimers. This is not a technical presentation, right? So if you're expecting some nice exploits, you won't have it, right? This is an incident response talk. We're going to cover some topics that are related to the procedure on how should we do in order to actually respond to an incident, specifically an incident on SAP systems. So yeah, this is just disclaimers of what this talk actually is. So let's start. Okay, incident response. Basically, this talk is kind of following the path that we have been following in the last Troopers as well. We have been presenting around SAP forensics 2 years ago, SAP anti-forensics techniques last year, and this year we came with this presentation that is kind of the conclusion of this, right? Is how should we proceed in order to actually move forward when something happens, which is something that actually happens, right? When there is an incident, specifically an incident involving SAP systems, if you are involved in this incident helping the customer, you can definitely not talk about it. So we cannot talk about details of anything we have been working on, but we will definitely present some fictitious case that you can see how to move over in the analysis phase. So we need to understand some topics, right? We need to define objectives, we need to define scope, criticality of the systems, prioritization. So all those things we are going to quickly go over. So basically, we need to identify the root cause of the incident, right? What happened? And this is related to how we detect it, that we will see in the next slide. Another objective is basically limit the damage, right? Once we know something happened on the system, we want to make sure that the impact is restricted and the impact is the lowest we can. And we definitely want to recover from it. So it's easier to recover from something like, let's say, someone got information from the SAP system. Yeah, we have to do some stuff. We need to identify the information that was leaked, but the systems will be up and running. But what happens if someone is doing a sabotage attack and the systems are done, right? We want to move forward quickly, and we want to make sure that our systems are up and running as quickly as possible, because the life of the company usually depends on it. And definitely, after all this process, what we need to know is identify how can we do better, right? What can we do in order to improve detection, in order to improve how we react, in order to improve the security of the systems? How did things go wrong, right? Was there any exploitation of vulnerabilities, any privilege escalation, any user being used in order to connect to the systems? So all that is part of the lessons learned. So in terms of detection, first of all, what happened, right? These are some examples of symptoms, because it can be really diverse, the situations that we are facing. It's not the same if we suddenly wake up and see on the internet or even in the news that one of our systems was compromised, right? Because that's in the public. But then if you receive an email threatening you or providing you information saying, hey, I have information of your SAP system, that's a different situation. Or maybe it's a mistake, right? The system just went down and it was an interface that was not working, which is kind of the most common case is when you have mistakes or errors, human error, making things to stop working, right? So here you have some examples. in terms of the symptoms that we identify and the dimension of the impact of this breach, right, or this incident. Because it could be specifically a breach, right? It could be someone trying to do that, but it could also be just a human mistake, right? Human errors, we know we are all humans and things like that are happening. So in terms of classification, actually incident response, when we go to a theory, right, there are different type of classifications, but right now we are talking about incident response on SAP systems, which makes it a little bit different. Not only because those systems, our company actually depends on those systems to be up and running, but also because of the information that is there, right? Well, in our previous talk, I mentioned the fact that there is sensitive information on the systems, vendors information, customers information, HR data, all of that is there, is sensitive, and it really depends on how you classify that information, right? It's all about being able to identify the extent of the breach. So, for example, availability, sabotage, system going down, confidentiality, information being leaked, or even a fraud attack. But how do we identify this kind of fraud attacks, right? Usually this kind of detection, if it's not because of some control that we have, that could be by chance. But if someone is able to identify something that is wrong, something that is suspicious, then we need to have this procedure, right, or this framework, an incident response procedure that tells us as individuals of a company how to proceed in order to move forward if something was detected around the SAP systems. But this could also be framed into a general incident response procedure, not only specific for SAP systems, but company-wise. But we definitely need to take care of the SAP systems as well. So let's say that as consultants or as someone that wants to help the company that somehow was identified an incident, right? It was a breach, it was some problem on the SAP systems. Well, this is very basic, but we definitely need to identify the assets that we want to analyze. It could be a portion of the SAP systems, it could be a physical server, a database. It really depends on the scope, right, and the information that we get. And these assets we should definitely be chosen based on the symptoms that we receive, right? And I know it's really difficult, and we will see how the procedure looks like in the end, but it's an iterative approach, right? So it's something that if this was really a breach, then it's something complex, because maybe the breach was identified in a system, but then if the extent of the compromise goes beyond that system, then you need to move forward and start analyzing other systems as well. This is something that is actually very complex, right? But it's a management decision that needs to be taken. This is something that you need to know beforehand, even before starting to get the hands into the data, right? Because this really changes how the procedures are going to be actually carried out. It's not the same to know that the company decides to move forward with legal actions rather than just an internal investigation that wants to identify the scope, the root cause, which information was compromised. Because this change of custody, this information needs to be processed in a different way, needs to be proved that this is the exact same information that was extracted from the system. There is a lot of formal procedures. There are a lot of formal procedures around this that will make things completely different. So that's a decision. It's a yes or no that will drive the procedure in different directions. So you will see a lot of text on the slides. I will try to be brief, but you will be able to keep this as a reference as well. We want this to be for you kind of help if you are trying to build something like this in your companies as well, or in your organizations. Prioritization, we need to set the scope. We need to identify the assets, right? The information, system, databases. So if if the incident was a complex one, then you will most likely have a lot of assets, a lot of information, a lot of pieces that you need to analyze. So it's, in terms of cost and time, it's prohibitive to go just like go and analyze everything. You need to prioritize depending on which are the most important assets for you and which are the most relevant assets in terms of the incident itself, right? So if you identify the incident from one system, then you will most likely start with that system, but then as the compromise was extending, then you need to define which are the systems that you want to keep looking at, right? And the impact. Well, what information is at risk, right? We have named just a few pieces of information, just a few things that you can find on SAP systems. But basically, all the information that you have in your SAP systems is critical from a company standpoint. So you need to have this classified, and you need to be able to identify to what extent the information was compromised. And believe me that that is not easy at all, especially SAP systems being as complex as they are, right? You have a lot of different log mechanisms, trace mechanisms that could give you a clue or an idea on what happened to some extent, but if you don't have the system properly configured, then you are eye blinded, right? There's not much thing that you can do. So, what do we do, right? If you go, it's really different from like if the police goes to a house, someone's house, and that guy was involved into some crime, they will get their computer, they will confiscate the servers, the computers, everything. They will do images, and that will be replicated through the images, hashing, and all the procedures. That's very straightforward and easy to do, right? But with the SAP systems, we are not in the same situation, right? You cannot go there and just unplug the system, get the images, get the information, start analyzing, because you definitely need to have the systems up and running. And that's really a challenge in terms of identifying what happened, because you get new information all the time. You know that log mechanisms and traces are, if it's full, it gets overridden depending on the log. You will get new logs. You definitely need to know that the system is being used and how to proceed.
Sorry, JP.
Yeah.
One more thing is, as he was saying, here is the challenge, because if you are extracting information from a live system, from a system where it's running, we have to be very careful to, at the moment of extracting the information, not being modifying itself. So this is the challenge in live forensics. That this is the kind of forensics which is performed with systems like SAP.
In terms of the analysis, right? Once the prioritization, the scope definition, the prosecution definition, the initial, the symptoms identification, information gathering. Once you have all that done, then it's time to get the hands dirty, right? It's time to analyze the information, and as I said before, it's a lot of information. It's a lot of different mechanisms. Some might be enabled, some others might not. This is just as a reference. There are others as well, so this list is even bigger, right? But this is just for you to get an idea on the type of or the volume of information that we are talking about, right? Many of these traces or logs or information is stored in the database itself. So you can think about huge tables, gigabytes or even terabytes of information. So, having done this very quick introduction into the topic, Sergio is going to describe a fictitious analysis phase on how you can move forward and follow the activity of a potential attacker, someone that managed to break into the system.
Thank you, JP. What I want to emphasize first this is not the complete process. The process is much bigger than that. You have all the steps that JP just explained, and then at the end you go to the extraction of information and then to the analysis. Probably, if it's a legal case, we as consultants, we are not going to be the people in charge of taking the decisions of what happened. As consultants, our task is just to extract information, and then the lawyer, the prosecutor, or another person with legal knowledge will determine if this evidence is right or wrong. So this is the scenario. It's fiction. It's not a real case. Just a story that we invented. This email was sent through the company. This is from an anonymous origin, telling the salaries of some people in the company. So this is the symptom that JP told before. So this is the information that was leaked. And here's when we need to start to think, which is the impact. The people will be angry. I don't know. It depends really on every company on who is in that email. So here comes the management decision of what to do with this. So just thinking that we already did all the process of analyzing the impact, the affected assets, and all that stuff. Then we try to analyze what happened, supposing that it came from an HR SAP system. So let's suppose that this information was extracted from an SAP system. Let's suppose this system is HR1. One of the first things that we need to ask ourselves is, was this system totally compromised, or it just was a request to this table from somebody who actually had access, or maybe was just that system compromised, or were other systems compromised too, in order to arrive to these systems. So we start to think a lot of possibilities of how this could be performed before. In this case, we saw salaries, which are located in the table PA0008, and which can be also accessed by transaction PR20 or the report you have here. There are other ways, but in order to do this presentation, we need to reduce the scope. So we are starting as entry points with these three SAP objects. So our first thing to do is try to find who could access to one of these objects. If we want to think in the use of transactions or reports, first we need to know which is the SAP version. Different SAP versions have different security auditing features. It's very important to ask this question. And then we need to start to think about the tools of SAP. The first one and the most known is the security log, which depending on who it is enabled or not, we can find who did what. And then we have the STAD transaction, which is for statistical analysis, that at the beginning is not a security transaction or security functionality, but we can get some useful information from this transaction. So the first thing to do as the person who is trying to resolve this case is to go to transaction SM19 and try to identify which are the events that are enabled for the security log. We need to know if analyzing this tool will be useful or not. In a company with a good process, this should be documented, and this information should be provided to the consultant before starting this process. But supposing that this is not unknown information, we need to get into this transaction and know and detect which are the events. In this case, we have two filters. It means in the first case, we're going to see all the events for the emergency user in this client. And in the another filter, we will see only logon events from any user. So if the emergency user did something, we are going to see it. If it was another user, probably not. We go to the transaction SM20, where we see the result of the security log. And we see that the emergency user was used. We have an IP address and some transactions. We don't know what this user did. Sorry. The only thing we know is that this user used user management transactions, but we don't know what he or she did. So the only information here is we have an emergency user used by somebody in that IP address. So some questions arise here, which are, what is this IP address? It belongs to somebody, is within a company outside, is an external, somebody who works here. And another very important thing is the policy of emergency users. How is it managed in this company? Thank you. So anybody can access to this user, or how is the workflow to access to the user? So these are questions and information that have to be performed during the process of extracting information. As we couldn't find anything very useful in the security log, we go to the STID transaction, which by default stores 48 hours of statistical information. It can be configured for other period of time, but by default this is the maximum period of time. Here. So here we find something. Somebody started the transaction SE16, which is used for query tables. And here we see that this person accessed to the table PA0008. So this is what we have. And we have also the user. STD transaction provides this information. Here the important part is we need to be quick, because if we perform this action 2 days later or 3 days later, we won't find anything here. So summary so far, we have an emergency user which we don't know what he or she did. We have an IP address, and we know that this user got into this table. So next steps. We need to trace back the creation of the user. Who used this user? Does it belong to a real person or to an interface? Where is it? Then we need to know if the system was compromised too, and if there is any backdoor left in the system. As we don't know in security log which user was created because that event is not enabled, we can use the SUIM change documents, which stores all the information about user management. You can see all the users created, by whom, which profiles were assigned, which roles, everything. So in this case, we see that this user was created by another user, which is me. So now we have identified who created originally that user. So till now, we have some questions, because the extraction of information and analysis is not an isolated task. We need to talk to people. So first we need to ask, who was this person? Who does user belong to? And then we have some hypotheses. Because in this case, in this fictitious case, we know that this employee was on vacation. He couldn't do it inside the company. So could somebody else use his account? And then if his office is closed with a key and he has the key, so nobody could enter to his office. So it means that the access was performed from another host. and probably this IP. We don't know yet. And then we still have the emergency user that it just was used, and we don't know why. So then, we know now that this was the user, but we don't know yet how this person got access to this user. So now we need to go deeper and analyze if there was any other kind of low-level attack. We are thinking about here about, we're thinking about SAP attacks. One common attack is the SAP XPG, remote command execution. And then an old unknown attack, the Oracle external authentication, or think about any unauthorized access to a lower layer. We can go to the transaction SMGWU, and go to the expert functions logging, where we will find the logging functionality of the gateway. But in this case, sadly, the events were disabled. So, however, so this is here is not useful for us. So we need to move forward. We cannot detect this attack. If this person attacked us by this way with the SAP XPG, we don't know. So just try with the Oracle external authentication attack. We go to a listener log. This is not a log from SAP. We are now talking about the database. So here we found a connection from the IP address that we were talking before, and we see a connection with the user DM1ADM, which is the user who is running the SAP system. As theory in SAP, this user connects to the database, but from the IP address of the SAP system. It cannot be used from another IP address. So here we see, finally, that this attack was performed. It means that the attacker got access into the database. What we don't know yet is what he did inside the database. We just know that this person got access to the user and created another one, but we don't know anything else. So at the end, we have some conclusions and some questions, because we know we asked to the IT team about this IP address, and it results that this IP address belongs to a computer which is used by several persons. So we cannot relate this computer to one person. So it turns more difficult. We can also determine that the attacker had knowledge about attacks on SAP. What else? One more question. If the attacker created a user from the database to access through the SAP layer to a table in the database, why did this user didn't got access through the database to the table? Because the user through the database created a user in the application, and that got into the table. So what else did this person do? It is suspicious, because maybe he's doing anything else on the database. Final steps: delete the user, check and validate all passwords, change all of them, check the user activity more than ever right now, and then comes the difficult part, which is we don't know if this person jumped to other system. We need to check all the destinations, and finally, check the integrity. And this is a key concept, the last one. As SAP is running on a database, and if the system is compromised totally, it means that the attacker can have access to the database too. So analyzing only the layer of the SAP system is kind of wrong. We need to analyze also the integrity of the database in order to be fully sure that we are fine, like, to go live again. So this is a complete process where we cannot be alone as SAP and just talking about SAP. We need to talk with all people, a database expert, an OS expert, and then take the conclusions at the end.
Thanks, Sergio. Okay, basically wrapping up, this is how we envision an incident response procedure in a bigger picture, right? So it's detection, it's classification, decision, and then it comes to start analyzing, having hypotheses of what could have happened, get information, analyze, and maybe go back to perform new hypotheses and generate new potential scenarios, right? And then in the end, after all this project was actually carried out, we definitely need to know what have we learned as a company in terms of maybe new security standards, maybe new procedures, new configurations. So having learned all this will avoid this kind of incidents in the future, right? Some conclusions, an incident response process is key. Yeah, we definitely need to have that. Most likely big companies have something like this in a global approach. We need to also incorporate SAP systems on this because SAP systems are key and our company is depending on them. It could be not only an isolated system, but it could be many systems that could have been compromised. Therefore, we need to perform the analysis. We need to know the extent of the compromise. We need to know which information was compromised, right? I leave you the conclusions. Also, this was supposed to be an open session, right? I know that it's late, so it's going to be challenging. I also leave you some other open questions. If you want to raise them or if you want us to discuss it, we can do it now. Otherwise, this is all for today. We have some references. Something which is very interesting is we have been working on previous talks, as I said before. Yesterday we had the BSEC workshop, which is also carried out every year. And on yesterday there was a talk about SAP logging and traces, and what was very interesting and very complementary to this. So if you are on the SAP topic, I really encourage you to sign up for a BSEC workshop for next year, because there are always good discussions on the table, and you get insight of the people that is actually doing penetration testing, doing audits, doing forensics, and it's really something that really gives you a lot of information. So for now, I will leave these open questions. If there's something that you want to discuss, that's great. Otherwise, we can go for dinner. It's up to you.
Okay, so first of all, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
So any remarks, questions, comments on this?
How many of these cases did you really work?
We cannot say for who, right? We cannot provide the details. We have worked with 4 cases.
4 cases.
Yeah.
Internal attacks or external attacks?
Different scenarios. So we had external and we had internal. And we have worked with customers, and we have also been approached by customers, and that's actually even more than this number, right? It's the feedback that we get from customers usually are internal problems, but incidents are more common than you might think.
Any more remarks? Questions? No? Okay,
Thank you.
So again, thank you very much. And guys, see you at the conference dinner.